Hey, what's up? Liron here. In this video, we're gonna paint this statue, and our focus is gonna be how to make the most out of every shape using wet in wet. It's something I'm doing more and more of, and hopefully it will become clear. Don't be deterred by the complex reference. I just want you to understand and see how I approach the different sections of it, and you can later on apply this to simpler ones. And before we get to it, if you enjoy my videos, don't forget to drop a like, comment, and share with someone you know. This will help. It helps me reach new people. So with that being said, let's take it to the table, get started. So a couple of notes before we begin. I actually traced this because it's a very complex subject, and honestly I just wanted to get to the painting stage, so tracing is fine. It's not cheating. Don't worry if you also trace. Now here's the thing, I really want us to focus on making the most out of wet in wet. I'm gonna go over these areas that are darker, and then within them I'm gonna inject wet in wet. The fun thing about this reference is that we basically have three values. We have the white, we have the mid value, and the dark, and that's it. So I'm gonna leave the white, obviously, and I'm gonna go for mid value. That's gonna cover most of it, and within that I'm gonna inject the wet in wet, the darkest values. Okay, so I'm gonna get started with the mid value. Just a neutral mixture. This is a perfect opportunity to just get rid of the excess leftovers on your palette. It's just a good time to save art supplies. Use that paint that you would clean off maybe, or whatever. So I'm gonna cover everything that's in the shadow. I made it very easy for myself by doing these crisscross lines, and I will put a link to a bit of a larger picture of the drawing stage for you. Okay, so here we go, and I'm just covering everything that's in the shadow. Now, when you do this kind of a thing, you just want to make sure that it stays wet and you're not losing the flow, which is why I'm also working very small size. Okay, this is fairly small, as you can see by the size of my brush. So I'm going to cover everything up. It can be a little confusing. Study the reference well, and my goal here, really, I wanted this to be a full process when I got started, but then I figured it's such a challenging reference. So let's just focus on making the most out of wet in wet, and the rest is secondary in my opinion. Really, it's not about finishing this, turning this into a finished painting necessarily. It's more about, let me show you how I get the most out of wet in wet. Okay, so this is entirely in the shadow, and we're done with this shape. We're closing off this shape. Now, as this is starting to dry, I can actually continue here because there's a little more time for it. I want it to dry and for the paint to spread a little less. But in any case, here we go with this shape here down at the bottom that we can kind of close off like that. Now, while this starts to dry, let's inject some darker values to it. So I'm mixing just a bit of a darker mix of those same colors, all my three primaries, and let's put it in and see what happens. So there's still quite a lot of movement, which means we won't get an as accurate result as we want. Two options: we can mix thicker paint, or we can just wait a little longer. I'm mixing thicker paint, and let's see what this will look like. So for me, that's good. That's a good amount of motion, not too much, not too little. So I'm going to put in this shadow within the shadow. I'm going to put the shadow of the eye because the eye socket is really dented into the face, so there's obviously a shadow there. We have the nostril shadow, if you can call them that way. We have a bit of a shadow on the mustache and the lip, like so. A bit of a shadow here as well, and a bit of a darker spot there under the neck. And you see how that's it. That's pretty much done. We may add, I love this highlight. This was a mistake, but I love it. I wasn't planning on putting it, but it looks good. You see how this is done. Like, I wouldn't touch the shadows anymore. I think they're perfect. I wouldn't change a thing about them. So you can get paintings done fairly quickly that way. So let me see if there's anything missing here on the shadow side. There's a bit of a shadow here. This section actually is a little darker, so let's get that in like that, all the way to, almost all the way to the bottom, really. Bit of a shadow here, and you see, this is done. Done. Amazing, just like that. Very simple. Now let us move on to some different sections. So let's start from the top, from his hand. The shadows actually here are very dark, so I'm going to start with the dark value. You see they're just black, really. So let's start with that and vary it as we go along. So this is a black value, fairly dark. Not a lot of mid value there. Try and get the shape of the knuckles for the fingers. Again, I'm not concerned with you getting all of the details I'm putting in, because it's a fairly complex subject, I know, for many. I just want you to see how we make the most out of just wet and really getting this in pretty much one go. And these references are perfect for that, the kind of reference that has just two or three values that you can rely on. Sometimes you'll just have two and then it's black and white and you're done. But here in these instances, it's very good. Do you see how I'm going to get a lot of interest? There's reflected light there on the left section. We're going to get that as well. You can also do some edge work. So the edge here is a little more blended. So let's blend it. Let's go like this. You see, I softened this edge a bit. So you get less of a harsh transition. Now let's move all the way to here, to the bottom of the hand. And I'm going to stop here and start injecting. You know what? This is still super wet. Actually, let's move on more to the bottom and fill in this entire section up, but the highlight. You see, I left a very clear highlight here. This goes like that. And this pretty much connects to the bottom. We're going to continue this in just a moment. Actually, let me just put some water there, so maybe it will stay wet. I'm not sure, maybe. And back to the top, mixing some darker values with all of my colors. Temperature here, I don't care as much. It's pretty much all gray, pretty neutral. A bit too yellowy, too green, a bit more red. Here we go. And I'm going to start injecting that here. So I'm not going near the edge, I'm actually going around the center, because we're going to have some reflected light there on the left side. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So along the center here, there's a very dark spot there, and obviously some dark spots under his arm. I actually did a drawing of the whole statue, and it was just a major headache, and I had a feeling it's not going to be developed into too good of a tutorial, because when the subject is too complex, it's very hard to learn from. So I wanted to make it easier for both of us, so for both me and you. There we go. A bit of a shadow there, and you see how it just builds the shape. Someone who does this really well is Wendy Artin, and she also works a lot of, and I did a Painting Masters episode on her, she also works a lot of statues, monochromatic, the kind that really reminds me of what I'm doing right now, and so she's a master of it. Like, you really want to check out her work if you enjoy this style. Now here the bottom section is also fairly light. Let's get some of this, I don't know, French ultramarine, a bit of what's this? Forgot the blue. Cobalt blue. And I'm just going to cover the whole thing up, connect all of the shapes. Again, look at the reference and study it carefully and to get the drawing accurately. But even if you don't, I just want you to try and make the most out of these wet areas. Okay, I put in a bit of water to make it a little lighter. It was a bit too dark. If you get anything out of this video, really is just to try and make the most out of wet and wet. There's a bunch of patterns here, but this is the peripherals of the painting, so I don't care about that as much. Here we go. Maybe a bit for the folds here, just to indicate there's a collarbone and some other stuff. Now here, let's inject, once again, some wet and wet. Let's make it a little cooler, maybe. And just put it in like that, you see? It just adds another sense of depth to it, a bit more three-dimensionality. We have this section that's fairly dark. It's just still so wet, so the paint is kind of blending in, but there's a couple of details here and there. And hopefully this makes sense. We're pretty much done. The one thing I do want to try is add the background in. So let's do that. I'm going to go at it just one go, very direct approach. I'm considering doing the background a little more colorful, less gray. No, let's do it. It's going to be black anyway, so who cares? No need to go into too much trouble there. I just want to get the contrast right. Notice this shadow is lighter, significantly lighter than the background. So I'm taking my time, I'm mixing a dark value. Take your time with it. This is why a lot of people have a hard time mixing dark values. They just don't take their time. You have to dig into the wells, okay? Now I'm gonna get started with the bottom actually, because I want to spread out the dark paint away from the statue. So I'm gonna go a bit awkwardly around it because I don't want to rotate the paper itself. And just create that edge here. Work my way around the highlights. And I love injecting some color into that. So let's put a bit of red there. That was close. Almost messed up the shape, the outlines. And notice how the lights now get a whole new meaning, especially the highlights, because now they have something to contrast with. Let's increase the dominance of the yellow here on the left section. Like so. That, and carefully work our way around the highlights. Sometimes it's easier to start with the focal point with darks and then spreading it out rather than pulling it from away from towards. So you go from and outwards rather than inwards. That can help. A bit more cool here on the peripheries. Carefully work my way around these fingers. I'm gonna lose some of the shadows here. I'm fine with that because it's gonna merge with the background. 1 finger, 2 fingers. This one should be shorter, perhaps. And we can actually go lighter there. Let's not go as dark. Maybe let's go warmer. Maybe the light comes from there. And I'm not rotating the paper, so have mercy on me if my shapes aren't as accurate. So like this. Here we go. Here I created contrast with the color. Not as much with the value. Let's go a bit darker there. And I think we're done. I think we're pretty much done. You can go back and strengthen some of the shadows on the statue. I actually really like it the way it is, so I'm not going to do that. One thing I will do, just for fun, is add... It could be a risk, but who cares? We're in the business of, experimenting and learning, so... Let's add these lines for the architectural details behind the statue, like that, just to give it some structure, like so. Here we go. And this actually has just a dark area there, that, and that. And I don't know, I love it. I hope you like it too. Let's let it dry. I'm gonna sign it and remove the tape and share with you the final result. So here we go, signed it, removed the tape. I hope you like to see this, like seeing this final result. One last thing, right now as it is, the background is indeed significantly darker than some of the, let's say, focal point of the face. You could fix this balance by going darker here. I actually like how it sort of gives us a feeling that we're looking at it out of focus, and this is kind of where we focus on, and this is kind of in our peripheral vision, even though it is indeed the focal point. So I don't know, I love this combination of the shadows here being a little lighter than the darkest shadow there. But you could change it up, you can do many other things. I hope you enjoyed this one. Now let's wrap it up face to face. So this is it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. And once again, I know this is a rather complex subject. Try and figure out how you can apply this to your own works and maybe simpler, easier painting subjects. You want to focus on closed shapes and figure out how you can fill them in, perhaps with an initial wash that's a little light, and then while it's still wet, put in those darks. And later on, you can, of course, make mistakes. You can make mistakes for sure, but you can fix mistakes. You can go darker where necessary, and you can also lift, usually, depending on the type of paper, type of brush. Mistakes can be fixed. I just want you to make the most out of every individual shape. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, if you haven't, drop a like and subscribe if you still aren't. Share this video with a friend. I really, really appreciate it. It helps me reach new audiences. And I will see you again in the next vid real soon.